Have you ever wondered how to consistently tap into a state of flow? Well, if so, you're in the right place. Because on today's episode of Discover WellBeing, I'm interviewing my friend, international speaker, and violinist, Diane Allen. Diane is a TEDx TED speaker and thought leader who speaks on increasing the meaning, joy, and fulfillment in one's work and life by accessing the flow state. As the author of Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do, Diane shares her insights on how to harness the power of flow. Years before neuroscientists discovered the positive impact of flow state, Diane had already experienced its transformative power in her own career as a violinist. Her unique approach to getting into flow on demand earned her a spot on the TEDx Naperville stage and features on TED, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and many more. Diane is known for her experiential keynotes, training, and coaching programs that go beyond engagement, featuring her 3-step flow strategy system, which empowers people to get into their flow state, be in their genius, and love what they do. In today's podcast, Diane is going to be sharing this 3-step flow strategy with you. So stay tuned and get excited. Diane, welcome. I feel so fortunate to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I'd like to ask, what does well-being mean to you?
Well, I think well-being means a lot of things to different people. I think overall, we would say we've got our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, all in good shape and in sync with each other. And I think a lot of people will say similar things to what well-being means to them. But with the concept of what we're going to be talking about today, which is the flow state, when I think of well-being, there are things that we have to do in life. And we do, right? We're very focused on doing. And the question is, are we missing out on the importance of being? And so how are you being when you are doing? That's, for me, the big topic that comes along with being in your flow state. When people are in their flow state, they say things like, I find myself by losing myself in the flow state, or I'm not doing, I'm being. So when we're talking with regards to flow state, well-being for me is just actually getting you out of that do mode and just in your being. There's another piece I'll share with you is flow falls under the umbrella of positive psychology. Positive psychology is all about taking a look at what's working well in your life, reverse engineering that so you can create more of that goodness in your life. And Martin Seligman is the psychologist who coined the term flow. And in it, he talks about your signature strengths as being basically when you are in your signature, using your signature strengths and you're being in your signature strengths, that it does unlock this. So when we talk about being in flow, it really is you in your best self, you in your wellness with regards to being. And it could be very task oriented. It could be very purpose oriented. It could be a variety of things. And we'll go into that later. But that would be the best way for me to describe well-being with regards when you're looking through the lens of flow.
Oh, I appreciate that because it's so holistic. Whatever role we're in, we're being in that role personally, professionally, and it gives people literally that feeling and that freedom to fall into it. So I'm really excited to know your origin story as it relates to who you are today. How did this journey unfold for you? Because you're a global authority on the topic of flow. Speaking to audiences all over the country, you're an accomplished violinist, and yet it started somewhere. So will you please share that story with us?
Yeah. So I'm 15 years old in my room, blasting the music. And no, it's not rock and roll. In my case, I'm listening to a violin concerto. And in my imagination, it's as if I'm the soloist standing center stage, pouring the core of my soul into every note I play. And for some reason, this is my most vivid of all time flow state memories. But why would I remember that even after all these years later? Because in reality, after doing a lot of training as a violinist and getting into orchestras, I found myself playing in a lot of orchestras. And I wasn't the soloist standing in front of the orchestra, right? I was like a rank and file member of the orchestra. And I loved playing in orchestras. That environment was where I could really find myself by losing myself in the flow state. And hours would go by and I would be completely immersed in flow. But life happens, right? And we quickly learn that interruptions are the number one killer of flow, whether they're small interruptions or big interruptions. So there was this period in my life where I was just slammed by life. For starters, my son was at the height of his teenage rebellion. He was also deeply depressed. He was very difficult to communicate with. I felt like I couldn't, like I'd lost complete control as a parent. My mother, Alzheimer's. And I found myself sitting on stage playing a Beethoven symphony without any emotion. Like I was just numb. And it really freaked me out. I was like, wow. And during the 8 years that I took care of my mom, I thought that putting flow and the things that were important to me on the back burner were the right things to do, right? Because I'm being of service to my mom. So I put myself aside. And I started to notice weird things like my violin students started leaving me for other violin teachers. I was so off that I asked the conductor. I was the lead violinist. I was the concert master of the orchestra for 15 years. So the concert master is second in command to the conductor. And so I asked for a year's leave of absence to see if I could figure things out. And when that year came up, I hadn't touched the violin in a year. My students had all left. And I was so lost. I was very confused. I actually sold my gorgeous antique violin that had been my musical voice for decades. I sold my high precision violin bow, my entire music collection. I sold it all and just basically put it down. It was a very confusing time in my life. So, fast forward, I think it was about 3 or 4 years. I'm at a film festival and I'm watching a documentary about a group of counterculture artists. And they're questioning everything. Like, who's to say that this is art? And who's to say that this is not art? Who's to say that this art is valuable and this art is not valuable? They were just like questioning everything. They were even questioning leadership. If for those of you who are familiar, I'm talking about Meow Wolf, which is an organization that is now have a number of different museums in the country. And so this was their origin story, and they were even questioning like how to run an organization. I found it incredibly fascinating. And for some reason, that night I couldn't sleep. And Allison, I could feel the power of the violin coming back on stage with me because at this point I had been doing some public speaking. And I thought, wow, where is this coming from? And so that morning, I called my friend Janet and I asked her, do you have any violins I can borrow? And if Janet, she's the kind of person that comes over to your house with a purple violin, right? So perfect. So I'm playing a little Bach and I'm like, no, I play a pop tune. I'm like, yes. And this 10-minute experience is how I learned I wasn't done with the violin. I was done with classical music. So confusing. But this was like a step towards clarity. Okay, so within a week, I'm borrowing an electric violin. Literally 6 weeks later, I've written my own music and I'm combining my violin playing with my public speaking. And it just happened really fast. I had no idea that this was anything I would ever do, right? This was never in my imagination. And the thing that I learned from all of this is yes, life gets hard and challenges can get in your way. but there always is a path back to flow. So in my son's case, the minute he graduated from high school, he went straight to the local airport and started taking flight lessons. And now he is a professional pilot. And I have never seen him so motivated, so focused, and so happy. I remember when I was a teenager and my parents would say, Diane, we just want you to be happy. And I would just roll my eyes and, heave a sigh. But boy, as a parent, do I get it. Because isn't that all we want? Is to be happy, for our family and friends to be happy, and for our colleagues and clients to be happy. So whether or not you are in flow or out of flow, wherever you are in your life, and facing whatever challenges, it's my belief that there is always an undercurrent of possibility and a new way for you to evolve. And I do believe that flow is oftentimes the answer. So I just want to wrap up this story by saying that, I don't know, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was on another podcast interview with a colleague of mine. His name's Tyler. And Tyler listened to this whole story of everything. And he says, Diane, you have played the violin. Clearly, you're not 15 years old in your room blasting the music anymore. And you taught violin for 28 years. Had a long orchestral career. And right now you're doing keynote speaking. And from where I sit, you are the only one on stage when you're doing a keynote. And you are the only one playing the violin when you're on stage doing a keynote. And from where I sit, it certainly looks like you've become the soloist. And I'm telling you, Alison, I never connected the dots, ever. That was the day that I learned from Tyler that these flow state experiences that we have, that maybe we put them, we think, oh, this is a pipe dream, or that's unrealistic idea, or no, I can't do that, right? My 15-year-old dream of being the soloist, I had completely forgotten about it, right? And here he is saying, I've come full circle and here I am, the soloist. I never saw that coming. Whether you're leading yourself or you're leading others, it's my belief that those signature strengths that you have, and those desires that you have, and those ideas and insights that come in from out of the blue when you're in flow state, that these are the pieces that really show you your true potential, even if they seem like pipe dreams and like unattainable. If you can dream it, you can be it, right? It's like that. But when you're in your flow state, if you can be in your flow state, you can also repeat it. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about for the rest of today.
Thank you for bringing in that piece about Tyler, because as you were sharing the story, those were the dots that connected for me just in listening to your story for the first time. I find it is oftentimes those around us can see so clearly what we're up to and how things are outpicturing versus how they're outpicturing from our own internal perspective. So I do appreciate and respect your journey. And at the time this podcast recording is happening, there's a huge population of individuals that are needing to care for both. And as many advancements that there are in healthcare, it lands on us to figure out how we're going to do that.
Yes. And I basically threw my anchor away, right, during that. Yeah. I really needed that anchor, but also there was that confusion that I was definitely done with classical music. That kind of mucked things up. But yeah, it's crazy. And I think that I would encourage everyone listening to put on your oxygen mask first all the time. But sometimes it doesn't mean that you're going to go get a pedicure and a manicure and a massage and all that, right? Yes, that's all lovely. But if we go back to that, how are you being when you're doing? Because if you're doing without purpose and you're just in your check off that to-do list mode, that becomes very draining and you get into a negative feedback loop. And one of the key indicators of being in flow is that you're in a positive feedback loop where whatever it is that you're doing is so rewarding. Your own work refuels you. And during that time of confusion, yeah, I was like lost at sea. And if I could have tied in some more purpose in my life at that time, I think I would have been much more grounded.
Yes, to the title, How to Nurture Flow for Wisdom, Vitality, and Happiness. And that vitality, when you are lost at sea or when you're checking all those boxes and things really need to get done and you're not marrying that with purpose.
This is a good segue right now to talk about the neuroscience of flow.
Please.
The flow state is characterized by losing all sense of time, losing a sense of self. Maybe you've got ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue. Think of a shower moment, something like that, right? Where all of a sudden you've got a flood of ideas. Things come together with a sense of ease, like when you get more done in 30 minutes than you had in the last 3 days. You're in that positive feedback loop, which I already mentioned, and you're experiencing more meaning and fulfillment in your work. So those are the key indicators that you're in flow. And when you're actually in flow, there's a cocktail of peak performance hormones that are released. They create brainwaves that are conducive to the flow state. And what happens during this time is the neocortex amps up, dramatically increasing learning speed. The prefrontal cortex temporarily shuts down. And when this happens, it basically quiets our inner critic and our fight or flight response. This is why people feel fearless and uninhibited when they're in flow. This is why ideas and insights could come in from out of the blue. And so these are the neurobiological conditions that set us up for being in our creativity and peak performance, basically. And those peak performance hormones that are released are anandamide, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And this is why when people are in flow, that they feel euphoric. You feel motivated. So the peak performance hormones that get released are anandamide, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And because of this, we experience euphoria, motivation, peak performance, and happiness all at the same time. So there's an article that organizational psychologist Adam Grant wrote. He also gave a TED talk on this. And in it, he talks about the mental health spectrum and how halfway between depression and flourishing, there's this midway point where you're fine, but you're not fine. You're functional, but you can't get motivated. You're just blah. And so the word for that is languishing. And according to Adam Grant, the antidote to go from languishing to flourishing is to get into your flow state.
You made it seem very natural going into public speaking. You are in a position to influence as much as you did as an orchestra violinist. You are so on purpose. So
Thank you.
unpack how you became the go-to person that corporations are looking at.
If I'm marketing myself, I'm going to say I'm an employee engagement speaker and I'm a leadership speaker. But flow is the how. The why is to unlock people's genius and love what they do, which is why that's the title of my book that's coming out, which is Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do. And that's the purpose, and reconnecting people with their humanity when they're in the workplace. And there's a lot of corporations that do treat people as robots. I hate to say it, but for those who are really invested in developing their people and developing a culture, this is the kind of thing that you really need to connect your people with, is how do people intrinsically tap into what makes them tick. And the thing about my leadership roles, I've got a picture for those of you who can see. This is the orchestra that I used to play in. I'm right there, second in command to the conductor. And what happens is when you're in your flow state, you're also in your heart space. And when we're going to now tap into Alison's expertise, which is heart math. So why don't you share what happens to the electromagnetic field when you're in your heart space?
Thank you. Personal and collective shared regulation. And it's the ability to regulate where the heart, brain, and emotions are in this state where all potential lies. And so when we can get in sync and begin to co-regulate with others, that's where the quantum field really starts to ignite. And I am actually, as I'm speaking, getting goosebumps because it's a transference of energy from self to the collective that you're sharing with, and then to the greater field, meaning the audience. And
Yes.
it's an entrainment of the heart. These are the frequencies.
So the electromagnetic field of the heart reaches, is it 3 feet around us?
Actually, a little bit larger than that.
Okay.
But yes, in effect, yes.
I've seen different numbers, so I'm like a little hesitant to, and then anybody who's in your field will sync up with you.
Yes.
And then they get into their projecting 3 or more feet around them. So if you imagine all of these circles intersecting, then it spills out into the audience. So if you imagine a circle of 3 feet around each person in an orchestra overlapping, that's what I was gesturing. So the thing is that when you are in your flow state, you are in a state of purpose and in, like I said, your intrinsic best stuff, right? You being you. And when you're in that space, without you even realizing it, the people around you are going to become enrolled. So it doesn't matter. This is why when I perform at my keynotes, I do it purposefully because I want to get into my flow state so the audience will get into it. It's like very purposefully projecting the energy and projecting your energy. So this is, as the lead violinist of an orchestra, there's no way I could verbally talk to people and lead them. Everything was done energetically. And so when you combine this with your words, it's incredibly powerful. So leading, there's 2 pieces to leadership. There's self-leadership and leading others. And so if I'm in the hot seat, no matter how well I do as a leader, whether I'm doing poorly or rocking it, it's going to ripple effect throughout the people around me. If I'm doing poorly, that's going to be a ripple effect of negativity. And if I'm like really into it, that's going to enroll other people to get really into it, to use like common lingo, getting into the music, getting into your flow state. So you have to lead yourself first to be in a peak state. How do you lead yourself to get into flow? And I think that's our segue for what we're going to be doing in a second here. How do you lead yourself to get into your flow state, number one, so that you can be at your best? And then that will transfer to everybody else. And now you're leading others. Self-leadership always comes first. It's another version of putting on your oxygen mask, right? You can't lead others if you're not leading yourself.
And there's also, to your point, it's not what you say or you do, it's how you make people feel that they can trust you, that they feel a sense of belonging. So thank you.
Yeah.
And yes, please teach us how to get into it.
Okay. I'm going to grab my violin here. Okay, so just listen first. Just listen. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Keep going. I'm going to give you your first challenge. You're clapping with the violin. I just want you to deepen your focus and deepen your listening. So you're going to notice, am I clapping right with the violin, a little bit before, or a little bit after? Just observe. Keep that level of focus as we add the next challenge. As you're focused on the violin, I also want you to sound like one clap.
each doing your own part. You're also doing it together. We've all heard of the concept of oneness, and you are experiencing that right now. Your last challenge. I'm going to play a melody you have never heard before, and I want you to end at the exact same time that I do. So just keep going. Awesome. Give yourself a round of applause. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, right? Because at first you're thinking about yourself, and then, oh, we're clapping as one. Oh, we are one, right? It's kind of a bit of a journey. And, you know, the thing that we were going through, I'm going to ask you a few questions so you can determine to what degree you were in flow or out of flow, and just kind of do a self-assessment. So just answer these questions internally to yourself. So the first question is, did you lose a sense of time? And how would you know that? Well, did the time go by fast? Or did it go by slowly, but in a good way? So just answer that for yourself. Did you have some sort of time warp? Did you lose some sort of sense of time? Next question is, did you lose a sense of self? How would you know that? Was your inner critic gone? Was your internal dialogue silent? Was it screaming? Was it in and out? Just take a notice. Next question is, did you find the added challenges satisfying in some sort of way? And when we added the concept of oneness, did that take the entire thing to a whole new dimension? Clapping, deep listening, focusing, these are skills. The challenges were to clap with the violin, clap with as one, and end the song at the same time as I ended the song. And then the purpose was that concept of oneness. So according to our psychologist, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, at the intersection of skill and challenge is the universal entry point into flow. So think about it. A skill without a challenge is not going to ignite anything. A challenge without a skill is not going to ignite anything. It's the two together. And as we just experienced, purpose takes it up to a whole new level. This is the model that explains why volunteerism is so rewarding. You've got a group of people with skills. You've got a challenge that you're rising to the occasion to. And it's got a sense of purpose. And don't you all find volunteerism incredibly fulfilling? So how can you take this model and put it into your everyday life? It's simply to use this in two different ways. As an assessment tool. Let's say you're in a team meeting, things aren't going well. You could stop and say, okay, what's going on? Do we have the skills we need for this? Do we have the challenges? Are we over-challenged? Are we under-challenged? Do we have a clearly defined purpose? You could use this as an assessment tool. You can also use this to plan for a project. What skills do we need? What kind of challenges do we need? And what's the purpose? So I'm going to share two stories with you from a workshop I did. This was with a group of HR professionals. And this one woman, she said, I knowingly hired somebody who was way overqualified for the job. I've been so nervous about retaining her. Now I know I could just sit down and have a conversation and ask her, Are there any skills you'd like to learn? How can we support you with that? Are you challenged enough? What kind of challenges bring out the best in you? And do you have purpose? Can we help you find purpose with your work? And then one other story I want to share with you that came from that same workshop. This one woman, she said, learning a new skill is a challenge, but purpose keeps us going, right, through that challenge. But once that skill is honed, you're going to have to reassess both the challenges and the purpose. This is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's universal entry point into flow. This is how he likes to explain one of the ways that you can increase your odds of getting into flow by using this as a tool. And while this works for everybody, you also have your own unique way of getting into flow.
Imagine a Venn diagram, okay, with 3 circles on it that says skill, challenge, and purpose. And you're going to use this as an assessment tool or as a planning tool. I'll give you a couple quick examples. So as an assessment tool, I was at a HR association conference. This woman, she says, I knowingly hired somebody who's overqualified for her job, and I've been very nervous about retaining her. Now I know I just have to have a quick assessment and ask her, are there any skills you'd like to be learning? How about challenges? What are the challenges that you like? And are you finding enough purpose in your work? And then another woman, she said, learning a new skill is a challenge and purpose can keep you motivated. But once you have that new skill honed, you've got to replan. And that might be looking for new challenges or maybe even finding new purpose for that skill. And in a really basic way for me, like I am not a procrastinator, except when it comes to dealing with my email inbox. I don't know why. But if I'm overskilled, okay, I am overskilled to do that job. That said, when I give myself a challenge, and it's usually a timeline. Okay, you're going to have that email inbox empty by 10:30 this morning. Guess what? I usually rise to the occasion. And when it comes to answering emails, I don't really have to pre-plan purpose because for me, writing these emails and connecting with people has so much purpose already embedded in the activity. So I just know that the purpose will find its way in. So that's just a really simplistic way of how can I ignite flow when I'm doing a mundane task? We all have to do mundane tasks. So that's an example. So the moral of this story here is whether you're leading yourself or you're leading others, to just make sure that the skills are always challenged and the challenges are always skilled and that there's a very clearly defined purpose.
You mentioned early on one of the things that is most disruptive are interruptions. How are people able to get back in when those interruptions come in?
Yes. So the universal entry point into flow is what we just talked about: skill, challenge, purpose. And yes, it's great for individuals, for leaders and teams to use that as a model. For example, an interruption a team had that I was working with was actually that they had a very creative project. It was actually a group of math teachers that were tasked with designing curriculum that teenage math students could relate to. And they were humming along and they're all skilled. They were rising to the challenge. The purpose was there, but their creativity dried out and they didn't know what was going on. So once we delved in, we realized what each person had a different concept of what the challenge was. And it was interesting because once they aired out what they were all thinking, they were able to then get on the same page, right? At least understand all the different challenges that they could go down. And all that did right there, that got them back into their creative spark. So that is one way, is to just take, once again, you're using this as an assessment tool. Each person has their own purpose, right? But you might also have a collective purpose with a team. So maybe there's a 2 level of purpose. Maybe there's a misconception of the purpose of doing something, right? So that's where that might come in. to help people to overcome being stuck. Maybe it's not necessarily an interruption, but just stuckness. But when it comes to overcoming interruptions, if we circle back to your unique signature strength, there's another system that I call the 3-step flow strategy system that hones in on exactly your unique way of getting into flow. And so, Alison, I'm thinking that I would love to coach you through figuring out your flow strategy, your unique flow strategy. And along the way, I'll be walking people through the steps. Does that sound good?
100%. I'm down.
Okay. So if we go back, first of all, you have to realize when you're in flow in order to be able to figure out your flow strategy. Because basically, you have to recreate a memory of a time when you were in flow. Just to recap what we talked about before, it's when you lose sense of time, sense of yourself. You've got ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue, things coming together with the sense of ease. You're in that positive feedback loop, and then you're in that place where you're flourishing. So if you could tell us, so we're going to start with the word, where are you when you get into the flow state? So give us some ideas of different places where you are when you get into flow.
I think a very common place is in nature. And even if you're being challenged with a hike, maybe the altitude, maybe the terrain is, I'm not used to getting myself up onto this boulder, but I get to pause and I get to look at the crevices, and I'm not a rock climber by any means, but it does hold a bit of challenge. I have a goal. I want to get as far up the mountain as I can. So nature is one. And then I'm highly creative. And so whether I am doing a project for feng shui or meaning design or website or anything that's creative, I literally just lose time because I see everything as information that's coming to me, and how do I want to work with it, and then that's it.
So you have a variety of places. So where is the first question? Where are you locating it? If you think about one of those places where maybe you get into it the most, or maybe you have a very vivid memory of when you were in flow, where is that place?
It's in a physical space that I have something that is going to happen in that space.
Okay. It could also be at a retreat center.
Yes.
Right?
Excellent.
And it could be in the yoga studio.
Yes.
Okay. So these are all different places where you get into flow. Okay. Now the next question is what? What are you doing? So I'm just going to give you an example for a second. If where you are is in the kitchen, what you're doing is cooking, that's what you're doing on the outside. Okay. So if where you are is in the yoga studio, what you're doing on the outside is yoga. It's very simple. Don't even
Yes.
think hard. So what are you doing?
I am preparing for people to gather.
Okay. So what you're doing is you're in prep mode. So that's what you're doing on the outside. Next question is, what are you doing on the inside? So if we go back to my cooking example, what you're doing on the outside is cooking, but what you're doing on the inside could be any number of things. You could be experimenting. You could be nurturing, right? You could be doing any number of things. If you're working, let's say where you get into the flow state the most is in your office. What you're doing on the outside is working on an Excel spreadsheet. What you're doing on the inside could be strategizing. It could be visualizing. It could be organizing. It could be problem solving, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you uniquely doing on the inside when you are in prep mode?
Yes, I'm literally gathering the information for it to come in, whether it's food, whether it's how the table is set, how the yoga sequence is going to flow for the whole time that we gather. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I'm responsible for holding the space in which things are going to evolve and unfold. So there is high intentionality, meaning the purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
The word gathering really stuck out because you said it a few times. So let's say where you are is in the yoga studio, what you're doing on the outside is doing prep mode, but what you're doing on the inside is gathering. And gathering means something to you, right? And in a sacred way, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, why is gathering so meaningful? Let me give you another example. When we're looking at why it's so meaningful, we're looking at our highest values: peace, love, joy, well being, self actualization, expansion, right? Trust, faith, right? It could be any of these, our highest values. And so if we go back to, let's say, our person in the kitchen, where they are is in the kitchen, what they're doing on the outside is cooking, what they're doing on the inside is nurturing. Why is that so meaningful? If you're like my dad, you're pouring your love into the food and you're feeding it to the people you love. So it's all about love. And that's why it's so meaningful. So if you ask yourself, why is gathering so meaningful?
It's the heartbeat, it's the energetics, it's the pulse, it's the connective tissue, it's everything. Gathering is everything.
Gathering is everything.
Yeah.
And this is very meaningful for you personally. Okay. And so that's why the thing is that when you define this for yourself, it now becomes something that you can use. Until we took this time to do these prompts to figure out, you might have known like how to get to that place, but now you specifically know. And when you can define what that unique way that you get into flow is for yourself, now when you have an interruption, we're circling back to interruptions, to gather, regather, and get into that heartbeat, right? You've figured out your system. Does that make sense?
Yes. So beautiful, Diane.
So now that you've figured this out for yourself, what are the insights you have? And how do you see yourself using what I call your flow strategy? So I'm going to explain what the flow strategy is in a second, but let's just let Alison answer this question first.
So with all events, with all planning, it really, I would say a majority of the time it goes your way, but there are a lot of changes, adaptations, flexibility that's required, creativity in a new form to overcome the challenge. And therefore, to just regather, come back to the intention. If we're needing to make a change, is it in alignment with our greatest vision for the highest outcome?
And does that feel like new information for you?
It's a new way to look at it, for sure.
Okay, great. So that's an example of flow strategy, gathering for the heartbeat, right? If I was going to just truncate it. So that means something to you, and that will help you to tap into flow whenever you need it the most. And I know as somebody who's in the event industry, yes, you're always dealing with a constant change in different variables, and you can't expect things to always be exactly in a certain way. So that ability to be nimble in the moment instead of freezing, now what do I do? You're able to tap back into that openness that you have when you're in flow. So the 3-step flow strategy system, I have a worksheet for people, but I'm basically going to do it verbally really quickly right now. You're asking 3 questions. Where you're locating it. Where are you when you're in the flow state the most? What are you doing on the outside and on the inside? And why is it so meaningful? And the 2 pieces that become your flow strategy is, what are you doing on the inside and why it's so meaningful? That's the piece. That's what you want to find out. And yes, people have one predominant flow strategy in their life, but you can also have many different ones. For example, I have one for performing. I've got one for writing music. I've got one for gardening. There's lots of different places I get into my flow state, and a lot of them have different flow strategies. So it's so many, in addition to interruptions, knowing your flow strategy will help you to get out of your comfort zone. When you know you're going to be in a place where you're out of your comfort zone, this is your home base. I was at a networking event as a violinist. I never had to go networking, never. And when I was looking into public speaking, yeah, I had to go networking. And I remember one of the first times I went to an event and I felt like it was like middle school, all these people standing in circles. It was hard to break in and have conversations. It was just like, are you kidding me? So it triggered all my middle school stuff, even though I was an adult. And then I thought, wait a minute. Okay, just listen. And I thought, what if I listen to the context of the conversation and I have something to share, I'll tell a story about it. And the thing about when one person tells a story, then other people are like, oh, I have this story. I have this story. So the first thing that happened was, number one, I felt like myself. Number two, it sparked these conversations. Because one person tells a story, all of a sudden somebody else has one. And then, I'm not kidding, I actually ran out of business cards that night. I never experienced that before, ever. So what happened is sharing is how I personally get into the music. It's sharing the message and sharing this experience. That's what I'm doing on the inside. And why it's so meaningful is that when you're sharing these experiences with people, you're connecting, and it's really that concept of oneness and being in unity with people. When I'm in large groups like the Walk for Alzheimer's, I'm the one who's moved to tears, right? There's something about unified groups that really touches me very deeply. So I know that sharing and creating unity are the things that get me into the flow state. What I didn't know is that how I get into the music would work in another place. And it was networking, sharing the message, sharing the story. When you connect with people, it's unifying. It was so simple. And so I realize now that flow strategy can get me out of my comfort zone anytime, any place, no matter how high the pressure.
Diane, I want to say that my heartbeat is synonymous with unity.
Yeah.
Intrinsically, that's what we all want, whether we know it, whether we say it, but we feel it. And now that we have a strategy, I'm imagining it's part of your book. So will you share a little bit more?
Yes. So the gift is I have a web page with everything that we talked about today in very easy outline format. There's also some how do you next level information on there, like how can you take this to your organization? There's also a couple of videos. This is my gift for you, and we will have a link for that. And then with regards to the book, the thing I want to just circle back to is we've been talking about wisdom, vitality, and wellness. Okay. So when you are in your flow state, you're in your deepest levels of intuition, you are in your wisdom. It is that unlocking your genius part. Vitality, we talked about that energy of influence, that when you are in your flow state, you are basically in your own authentic way. You are getting into what it is that you get into. A musician gets into the music, right? And so that piece is that vitality piece. And then the wellness. How are you being when you are doing? Are you in your flow strategy? Or are you using the universal entry point into flow to get into flow? So how are you being when you're doing? And all of that and a lot more. I have a lot more stories as well as more information on leadership in my book, which is called Flow, Unlock Your Genius and Love What You Do.
Oh, I can imagine the book as the extension of your speaking engagement impact. It's a tool that is very sacred to self and very sustainable. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are you enjoying the Discover WellBeing podcast? If so, I would love to hear about it. Leaving a review helps more people find us and really makes a difference. So share your thoughts on Apple Podcast or your favorite platform.